these guys and gals. Oh, sorry.
Bruce Grant.
Well, somebody's in paradise.
If only.
Are you in paradise?
Well, if you call Sculptura Muchenoi paradise, yes.
Right.
My goodness me, quite a few people. Wow.
There's a nice picture. We haven't got a picture.
Okay. Oh, Mark Mariska's here. Hello, Mark.
Hi.
Good to hear you. Hello, Scott. Hello, Scott. Hi, I'm Maria.
Hello, John.
Hello, John.
Hello, do I see a beard sprouting up there?
In me,
Yeah.
it's always been there, John.
It's always... Okay, we haven't seen each other for a while.
No, we haven't. Good to see you. Nice to be here. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, great. Welcome to
Hello.
the room. Hello, Tatiana. Hello. Julia, hi.
А он там есть, он есть, но просто получается вторая производная. Перейди, скажем так.
Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Constantine. Who else was talking then?
There's so many people, I can't say hello to everybody, but
Oh, hello. That's better. I can see more people now. Sorry, that joke fell flat.
Stephen's
Oh, hi, John.
Harrison and Stephen Hallett. Hello there.
Hello, hi.
Hello again, welcome. I don't know whether you can see.
Hi, John.
Hi, thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi. Right.
Hi.
Okay, and people are still coming. John, do you remember the success of the previous lecture? Offline one.
Well, yes. I mean, I'm actually quite taken aback, to be honest with you. by the number of
There
people.
were more than 60 last year, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a real success.
Was it last year or the year before?
I think, well, it was last season. I'm not sure which year it was, but it definitely was last season. Yeah, and people are still coming. So great. Okay.
I guess we wait a few minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
Everybody very slowly.
Someone's got some.
It's not Wales in the South Sea.
Professor,
Wonderful background.
yeah, very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Also fantastic.
Wherever Bruce Grant is, I want to be there.
Boy, that's unfortunate.
Exactly.
That's a really good introduction to me. Thank you very much. Whoever said that. Oh, it's Andrew. It's Andrew Widget. Hello, Andrew. Hi.
Hello, John. Hello, John. How are you?
I'm okay, apart from terrible toothache and not sleeping for 2 nights, being so nervous about this. I'm fine.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. There's some medicine behind you somewhere.
Oh, the whiskey, right? Yeah, okay. Right.
I was going to suggest, John, that you looked as though you've lost a little bit of weight. Perhaps the last couple of days have been good for you.
Well, I'm not sure whether losing weight is possible that I have lost some weight. Just about.
Since last I saw you, yes.
I had a haircut today. That could be
That's
a factor in the visual aspect of things.
right.
I lost all that weight some years ago, John.
Oh, did you? Okay, right. That's very, very clear, Andrew. Very, very. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shut off the video and listen to you.
Oh my goodness.
Deep breath.
So I suppose we'll start in a couple of minutes because the people are still joining in. So
Right. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Last opportunity to say my prayer before we start.
My prayer.
You just want the other way behind you, Bruce.
Someone has feedback.
Andrew,
Can someone
you-
just check their feedback?
And my other dear students, thank you very much for coming. I really
Otherwise,
appreciate
we need to.
Check the feedback.
Yeah, we'll have to mute.
Jay, how?
I
Good to see you.
suppose.
That's a little better.
Right.
Good evening.
Is a Stephen Harrison a relation of yours, John?
Indeed, a brother.
Oh, hello, brother Harrison.
Two brothers, Malcolm and Stephen, and they're both here tonight. I'm very, very happy about that.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Я здесь, я отключался по работе.
And Malcolm's partner, Jay.
Алло, добрый день.
Oh, I didn't know you spoke Russian, Jay, but doesn't matter.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Jan Silva, hello.
Нет, мы не выкидывали. Не было вообще. Было 3 типа. Металлички, они были нумерованы 1, 2, 3.
Да, я слушаю.
Can we start?
I'm sorry.
I think people are going to wonder whether it's just what we do. We just sit here and look at each other.
Yeah.
Guess each number.
Oh, wow.
John,
good evening. How are you? How are your teeth?
Which John are you talking to?
To you. I'm so
Hey.
sorry.
Well, I think if it's me you're talking to, I'm actually fine now. Like I said, I had severe toothache, which wasn't very pleasant. But I've taken sufficient amount of painkillers. I tried not to take any alcohol, probably recipe. So I'm sort of okay. Thank you.
Oksana,
Okay, so I suppose we shall start. So, Colin, could you please mute anyone but
I'm going to
us?
mute everyone and then let you and John on.
I can still hear.
Take it unmuted.
John?
That okay? Has that worked?
Yeah.
Okay.
And is Oksana, are you going to introduce?
She's muted, Cole.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Hold on a second. Yeah, so is it okay? Do you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, welcome to ALE. So, it's another success, John. So,
Well, I haven't even
my
started yet. Hang on,
congratulations.
I put it a bit early. I mean,
Unbelievable. It's great. So, I suppose for the newcomers, I need to speak to tell something about our club, just a few words. So actually, I've taken up after Mr. Harrison as a co-host of English Language Evenings, the event that started 23 years ago and has been doing I should say pretty well so far, and it's a real honor for me tonight to present the co-host and also co-host for some time, Mr. John Harrison, who is going to speak about his another book. I know that it's definitely the second one we are presenting so far at our club. So, and this time it's going to be about the Soviet Union and Russia. Just a second, which is, sorry, I'm nervous a little bit, presenting the co-host. Voices from Russia, 1970s to 2000. So, John, you're welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Oksana. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I guess before I share screen and go over to the official presentation, I suppose I should say something about myself because not everybody here knows me. I guess I'd like to just say that I'm a British citizen, born in 1954, so you can work out how old I am. For some insane reason, I studied Russian and Chinese for a first degree in London in the 1980s. I worked in London for several years as a translator and even interpreter before heading off to Moscow and to work as a translator for, get this right, Raduga, which means Rainbow Publishing House in 1986, before the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. After that event, Raduga Publishers sort of transmogrified into a car sales outfit, and I transferred over to work in the international media in Moscow. In 1996, I went back to the UK and did an MA in postmodernist Russian literature and later an MSc in global security. Back in Moscow, I work in the media as an editor. I worked in the media as an editor. And for the past 15 years, I have worked as a teacher at a school, and I now lecture in English and cross-cultural communication at 2 Moscow universities. So that's me. So let's, I suggest now that I share screen, okay? So I'll try to do that without something catastrophic happening. Just a minute. All right, so press that. Okay. Okay, so this this book, this project that Oksana mentioned is called Voices from Russia, Witnesses to Change, 1970 to 2000. And I'm going to try and speak not for too long, maybe 30, 40 minutes, I hope not longer than that. It's the book should be out by now, but it's not. That photograph is a Photoshop lie. The book does not yet exist. And I put this down to COVID-19, but in fact, it's because transcribing and translating interviews and then editing them, making them comprehensible, some of the interviewees, although I understood them when they were talking to me, I realized that they may not be very clear when other people read the text. So it took quite a long time to put all this together, longer than I thought. So it's a 300-page book of interviews with 11 Russians and 11 foreigners who lived in Russia during the whole or part of the period 1970 to 2000. It's in English, and I hope it's going to be of interest to both Russians and foreigners. It's illustrated mostly, but not exclusively, with drawings and paintings that were done in Russia at that period, during that period of time. And it'll be available late December on Amazon and February in Russia in hard copy. Basically, it's a window on the last decade of the Soviet Union and the first decade of the Russian Federation. So why? Why does anybody write a book these days? Well, obviously not for money. There are several reasons. It's quite a personal thing, I suppose. I've reached a kind of certain point in my life. I feel that I'm kind of actually very fortunate to have seen a lot of things happening here in Russia. And I guess, to be honest, I'd like to pass on some of these experiences. Even if only one person reads this book, and she is my daughter, I will feel that this project has been worthwhile. Another thing that I have to say that I've those of us who have lived in Russia, particularly in Moscow, for a long period of time, can't help but notice the changes. I mean, Moscow in particular has changed beyond recognition. And so much so that one wonders if one's living in the same city as you were 10, 15, let alone 30 or 40 years ago. So I have sometimes deja vu type experiences. For example, walking by a large white building. It's actually completely right. It's called the Russian White House. And I remember being inside that building during the attempted coup. And on the night of the 20th of August, I was working as a accredited photojournalist at the time for one of Western newspaper. I was going to say rag, but perhaps I better call it newspaper. And I remember, you know, a voice coming over the tannoy system asking women and children to leave because a force of the Russian special services was about to land on the roof. But very few women and children actually did leave. And that was just displayed by them of real courage, and just shows a kind of determination there. But I've kind of forgotten about that. And these flashes of all I can call them sort of deja vu type experiences keep on coming back, and then they go away again, because the present reality is so convincing. But it's deja vu not from some past life. It's deja vu from this life. We've all, those of us who've been here for a long time, experienced so many different changes. So I thought it would be useful to kind of go back in time and try to get some of those experiences down while it's possible. The other main reason that I wanted to do a book of interviews is because I feel that there have been a lot of excellent history books written about that period, but perhaps something's missing. And I think that something is the human element. You know, I'm talking about the colors, the smells, you know, what was it like buying food? What was it like having a relationship? All of those things, trying to rent a flat, for heaven's sakes, you know, those things perhaps are not important, but in a way I feel they're extremely important because they reveal how people interact with each other and the world around them. And that, I think, says an awful lot about any place or time. So that's kind of my motivation for doing this. Okay, now we get on to the difficult part, how. I've said that I've compiled basically I have compiled a book of interviews, but how did I come to the decision to use an interview format? Because obviously there are other ways of writing about that period of time. I do have opinions and experiences about things that happen here, but I wanted to try to avoid pushing those sort of ways of seeing the world. I didn't want this work to be my voice, but rather a collection of different views, because I reckon that will be more credible somehow. And quite honestly, I don't even know whether my views are actually correct or not in the end of the day. So I hope they are, but I'm not sure anymore, to be honest with you. So simply, I thought that it would be more interesting to hear more than one view. Using an interview type format, I thought, use what's called open-ended interviews. That is that I wouldn't have to come in to an interview with a already pre-prepared list of questions. I could rather just sort of try and make the person I was interviewing feel relaxed and just let him or her go, you know, and try and follow whatever narrative he or she wanted to express. And that kind of has advantages and disadvantages. I could avoid an overarching narrative. That is, I didn't feel I had to ask people questions that fitted in with a certain scheme or way that I saw or I see the world. And therefore, I thought, and I believe that this book may be of interest to more people. Because it's not really a political work. It's a work about how people lived, what people thought, and how they survived during those decades. And hopefully it'll be interesting for you to read it if you should so wish to do. I didn't have to write a conclusion, which was really wonderful, because a conclusion would mean that I am measuring everybody's reaction against some sort of a yardstick, which would enable me to come to a conclusion. But in this particular period of time, in this particular country, that's quite difficult to do because, as we all know, it's a highly politicized situation. It was then and it is now. And so I sort of felt that compiling a book of interviews would give me the opportunity to present a collage of different opinions, of different views. And the reader, if he or she reads all of them, and I would recommend you, if you do go as far as buying this book, to read them all, at the end of it, hopefully, you should get, I hope, a feeling of what it was really like. And that's the important thing. Now we come to the difficult part about how, and I'm sure that some of you know what I'm going to say. How did I find people to interview? Well, I'll tell you, about a third of the interviewees are people who I or my Russian wife know, or people I had met or heard about through my foreign contacts here. And you may think, well, that isn't an objective sample. Well, my defense is that with the Russians, I can say that friendship is something perhaps a little bit different from what it is in London, for example. People are friends with people that they knew at school. And those bonds last for a long, long time. It matters less, at least in comparison with Western societies, what political beliefs and attitudes your friends may have, whether they're oligarchs or whether they're unemployed. I know it's difficult to really take seriously, but it actually can be like that here. They are friends and that's it, end of story. Example of this is one lady I interviewed here in Moscow, and I met her a couple of months later, and she just dropped that, oh, by the way, I'm a neo-Stalinist. And I thought, oh my God, neo-Stalinist. and I mean, it's just this sort of situations occur time and time again. And then you realize that in a way you have to look at Russia and at the way things operate here on the ground here. You know, you have to operate according to the local rules, the local scenario. And so putting all that together, that kind of, I hope, gives you some kind of understanding of how I put this in together. Just let me say a bit more about this qualitative interviewing technique. I found that if I let people talk as long as they wanted, encouraging them to speak from the heart, even if what they were saying I personally found horrible, sometimes their arguments fell apart by themselves, although that wasn't the goal of interviewing them. So I have to say that in the end of the day, I'm confident that the whole collage of opinions and experiences presented in this book does represent a valid statement about what happened in Russia during that period of time. But this is not an academic work, this is not a dissertation. It's a more kind of spontaneous and emotional view of things. In general, I have to say that qualitative interviewing is not really accepted in Russia. I expect to get some flack from that here. But if I'd come into those interviews with a list of questions that I had thought up, then it would be me trying to get people to fit into a framework based on my point of view, instead of the much more interesting method of letting people take you on their journeys beyond my concepts of whether that is right or wrong. As a result, some of the transcripts for interviews were over 30 pages long, which is one reason why this book is so late. So I hope you'll excuse me for that. Okay, so just this slide actually shows you some of the content of this book. People's names from the left, and some of the topics that they came up with are visible, where you can see that are not very clear, but I'm not sure how to enlarge it and not muck the system up. But I actually did express doubts during this long time preparation of this project that what I was doing I was doing it the right way. It certainly would have been easier to link up what he said about growing up in the Soviet Union, she said rather, and link that up with what this person said down here, and then link it up with this one and this one and this one, put on a background of that, attitudes towards foreigners, political awakening, and so on. And actually, I could say whatever I wanted to say. I could spin it almost in any direction I like. But at the end of the day, I thought, well, that's not really very honest. Let's try and operate in a more kind of, responsible way. So that's also possibly of interest to you. So another part of how, I decided to include foreigners as well. I use the word foreigners rather than expats because some of the foreigners don't really feel that they are expats, because in this country at the moment, the word expat has a semi-negative connotation to it. It's even become political. So I prefer the word foreigners. I wanted to present readers with the opportunity to compare what sort of information foreigners received about Russia during their formative years. Compare that with what kind of information Russians received about the West and Westerners when they were young. I thought that would provide evidence of the power of the media, propaganda, and the importance of culture in general, because that's something I'm interested in. Those of you who might have read or heard of my first book will know that I'm very into the influence of culture on the formation of mindsets. I do believe that culture is, of course, a social construct, but I also believe that it's real, it exists. And we are, in a way, kind of trapped inside our own cultures. And it's very difficult for us to get outside it and understand and see and appreciate the world as it is for other people, particularly if they happen to be living in a country which is politically at odds with the country that you're living in. Another reason I include foreigners in this book, and excuse me, foreigners, I don't mean to denigrate your position in this book. I want it to be interesting to Russians as well. I mean by that the older generation of Russians who have perhaps heard enough about the time of changes, but would be fascinated to hear about how foreigners lived here during that period and how they handled that time. Right, I'm going to do a kind of few teasers, actually. I don't want to speak for much longer because I'd much rather do sort of questions and answers if that's possible. So you can get a kind of a feeling for what kind of things people talked about. But this is really dangerous because you might think it's like when you're a journalist and you give your copy to the editor, and the editor, and you tell the editor that this is just a rough copy, okay, it's not the final version, but the editor always gets the wrong end of the sticks and judges your work by what you give him. So this is not a representative of everything that's in this book. This is a tiny, 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 tiny fragment of the whole story. But I chose, I'd like to just give you a few examples. So first of all, some of the points that are mentioned by Russians, most Russians talked about expectations of the future that they had formed by being exposed to a kind of mixture of Soviet and Western cultural messages. And for me, it was really interesting to see the power of Western messages, be it rock music, be it film, how these fed expectations which were not always fulfilled, something that I'll come back to in a few minutes. And after the Soviet Union fell, people talked about difficulties in adopting Western stimuli of motivation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Maslow's theory of motivation. Well, having conducted these interviews, and I'm like you, I mean, I'm sharing what other people have shared. I didn't come up with this stuff. I'm in a privileged position of kind of passing on information that I've received from other people. So I think that we need to revisit that theory if we try to apply it to the Soviet Union. And that's, I think, one reason why Western advertising companies like BDBO when they came here. They completely got it wrong. They did not understand, what Russians respond to, because it's a long story, and I don't think we can have time to get into it now. Another major topic talked about by Russians later on was disillusionment in Western values. This post-1996 in particular. Some interviewees became politicized, either strongly for Westernization or strongly against. And in the context of Russian history, this is perhaps nothing new, which reminded me that cultures do not change quickly. And again, this is a recurrent theme from the first book. And if they do change, that movement may only be temporary, but we are talking about the period 1972 to 2000. We're not talking about what happened after that. But all of the interviews, the Russians disliked the way that the Russian government handled the situation in the 1990s. Lots of Russians talked about basic survival, about running and working in the newly allowed cooperatives, they were called. They were small businesses. About how attitudes between people changed as commercialization of everything became a norm, whilst others only wanted the process to go further. Others just wanted the process. Okay, I've got some music playing on my computer. Okay, whoever's playing music needs to shut off your sound. Other people just wanted real democracy and so on. So there was, all of the interviewees were different. They all expressed different things in a different way. There was some overlap, and that was great because everybody expressed his or her own particular personal view of what happened. And I personally think that was great because it provides more depth and perspective, because I try to ask people if they agree to talk about their childhoods and their formative years. And that kind of view back into their lives, I felt kind of gives the reader an understanding of why they came to those conclusions that they stated during the interviews. Okay, so foreigners, a few kind of topics that foreigners that were recurring, if you like. There were some really fascinating comments made by foreigners about their upbringing in the States or in the UK in connection with McCarthyism. And it was fascinating to hear about the effect of Soviet propaganda on some of the foreigners, including coverage of the Soviet space race. And this was all can be compared with the impact of our own Cold War messages about the Soviet Union, as exemplified by James Bond type stereotypes. So there was lots for me really fascinating kind of references to, again, cultural messages which formed people's opinions. And I found that amazing to be able to compare that to the cultural messages that Russians received at about the same time. The 1990s, the people who arrived in Russia in the 1990s, the foreigners, were not the kind of people who had learnt Russian perhaps at army language school previously, who came to Russia in the 70s, because they were the only foreigners who spoke Russian. They were business people who were really unprepared, actually, I think, for what happened here and what was happening here. And they had problems integrating into Russian life. And of course, they had problems doing business here. Obviously, we all know about the mafia, which has kind of been perhaps romanticized. But they all sort of spoke, most of them spoke about that. And they couldn't handle things like, having to make side payments to other people to get the contract and this kind of stuff. And one guy, a Frenchman, and I'm really grateful I was able to interview him, because he didn't come to Russia to do business. He came to Russia to experience the Russian soul and to experience Russian literature in real life, to be in the land, where Dostoevsky and Chekhov and Pushkin had walked, and to experience some of those emotional feelings. He came first in 1980 on a trip to the Olympics as a child, organized by his school. Then he came back to work as a teacher in the French Embassy School, I think in 1986. And he returned and came back in 1992. And he talks about how Russia had changed, that it really had become another country. For him, all of that magic, that kind of stuff that we kind of perhaps we used to fantasize about Russia, well, some of us did, had gone, and it was replaced by a much harder, a much more pragmatic reality, which the Russians were struggling with as well. So again, hopefully that kind of insight, which is provided by people on the ground here, will be of interest. Okay, I don't know how long. I've got some more goodies about expectations. I thought I'd sort of try and tell you a bit about that, but I don't think I will. I think I've spoken enough. I don't want to say too much because I want you to buy the book. Excuse me, reclama. So I'm going to stop now and perhaps ask the host to take back control and open this up to questions and answers. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, Colin, could you switch on the sound?
That was a good one, John.
Thank you.
I think people can unmute themselves.
Mm-hmm.
John, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I'm Scottish. I live in Scotland in the UK. I have never been to Russia, but I've known John for a while and another mutual acquaintance for about 26 years. So I have an awareness, plus I have an interest from the socio-economic political perspective, and in particularly McCarthyism.
Yeah.
But I find there is quite an uncanny correlation happening in the United Kingdom at the moment, and I use that term very loosely. What you said about labelling, we're finding that our Scottish produce is being labelled with Union flag. We're finding that I personally think our media is biased against the Scottish voice, if you like. And I think we're coming much later what's happened in Russia with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And I get this sort of, as you were saying, deja vu feeling like, oh my God, maybe we're starting to waken up and smell the coffee now in this country, that there's a feeling of dissatisfaction and looking back to our own cultures and to history that we should be learning from. Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
No, I've managed to unmute myself, which is a major achievement. Okay, I hope that somebody did hear what I was saying before. I might have been muted.
Oh yeah, it's fabulous. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have to say, I mean, I have to be honest, I find I can't really relate to what's going on in Scotland, possibly because I haven't been there for a while, because I had four tickets cancelled on KLM, you know, and I'm really pissed off about it, and I can't actually get there. I don't actually know what's going on in Scotland, and furthermore, I've been totally engrossed in this Russian thing, you know, over the last over 2 years, you know, and I'm a little bit out of the Scottish scene, so to speak, and I really can't contribute anything to conversation about Scotland at the moment. So yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize, but I can't really, I have to
No,
pass.
no, it was just the fact that there's an intriguing correlation in my mind.
Well,
between-
maybe there is a correlation in every society, in every
Yeah,
country,
yeah.
times between culture and I don't know, I don't want to say politics, it's too dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But say history and about what happens in the world that we live in, you know, perhaps it's something that happens with a delayed effect. But yeah, I mean, sure, I on that level, perhaps there is some correlation, yeah. But I repeat that my task, my goal in this particular book was not to make some sort of, you know, universal global, you know, statements about about the way things work. Just really much humbler, and just talk about, you know, what happened in Russia over that period of time. And yeah, okay.
May I jump in here, Stephen?
Oh, Stephen, hello. Yeah.
Hello, hi. I just wanted a question really, but to say a few words. Firstly, thank you very, very much, John. That was a fantastic introduction and whets my appetite for the book whenever it comes out. And just so that everybody knows, John and me, we go back probably nearly 40 years.
Yeah.
We were both studying in China. So my sort of life and career paralleled John's in Russia. I spent most of the last 40 years in China, a lot of it. I'm actually in London now. But one thing I wanted to ask you, I mean, there are so many interesting parallels. I could ask 100 questions, and this may open up another long conversation.
Yeah.
All I wanted to say is that one thing that we've found in the last few years, I'm working in the field of disability in China, is that in such a large and complex society, trying to find these threads, these strands, as you have done, these themes which really envelop people's lives over time, is very, very difficult. And we come back to, and this is why I absolutely agree with what you were saying, we come back to the importance and the intrinsic validity of personal testimony.
Yeah.
And what you've described is you're allowing people to tell their stories. I was fascinated by the methodology that you described of, you know, there are many ways of interviewing people, but you chose this open way where you let people pursue their own narrative and their own story. And I personally think that's, in this case, is a very good way of doing it. It's a very democratic way of doing it, but it also means that you validate and you show real respect and integrity to that person's thought processes. The question I have is one of the issues we've found. We've been doing slightly similar things in what we call participatory research in China, is that when people reveal a lot about themselves, they're also quite difficult ethical issues if they're talking about other people or revealing information which could be compromising or damaging to them. And I'm sure you're sensitive to that, especially, I mean, in China, it's a huge problem because of all sorts of security and other issues. But in the modern world, it's very difficult because social media is so powerful and can be very risky. How did you deal with those kind of ethical concerns?
Yeah. Well, can I just say, firstly, it's great to see you. Thanks a lot for coming today. And we certainly go about a long way, that's for sure. And just about this interviewing technique, it's something I picked up when I was doing that course in Glasgow, a politics course. It's about the only thing I picked up really that I found really useful in my life. But it's difficult because, as I said, you're faced with somebody who's maybe expressing something that you don't agree with. You know, maybe you don't agree with that, you know, really adamantly, really strongly. And yet, if you express that, you know, one muscle on the side of your mouth kind of goes out of control and expresses a kind of semi-frown. That's it, you're finished. You know, that person lost confidence. And the word that they used at the university was you have to bracket yourself. You have to kind of somehow put a barrier between you and me, you know. And it's really difficult, you know. And I mean, I'm not very good at it. I've tried, and I'm still not very good at it. At encouraging people to say things that you don't agree with. And that's just one thing. Next, the problem with the ethical thing is huge, and it's not. I don't think it's as bad as it is in China. Okay, I don't think that level of kind of personal control is as evident in this society at the present time. So, but I am aware of what you're talking about, having spent a few years in China. It would be in the past. I don't actually know what the situation is right now. It may be worse, it may be better. But I think that there also is another factor to perhaps consider. That is that Russian society has been structured for an awful long time with a big gap between us and them. And as long as you don't go over certain red lines, as long as you don't actually criticize this person or that person. See, I'm afraid of doing it now. Okay, I won't actually say who I'm talking about now. As long as we don't cross those lines, you can almost do whatever you can say whatever you want and do whatever you want, because there is a sort of, I feel, as foreigners, my observation, I may be wrong, but I have the right to say what I feel. I feel that there is a gap between, you know, the us and them gap is wider. And so there is a feeling of, well, who cares? You know, it's not that important. And it isn't that important, really, because nothing that anybody has said is of any threat to the powers to be. It would be if they had gone into talking about particular people and particular events in a certain way, but nobody did. Perhaps because they're all house trained like dogs, you know, nobody ever goes over that line because they know if they did, they'll get told off, you know. But whatever the reason is, that problem didn't really come up. So not in the same way that it did it has done in China. There were a couple of people who were worried about their employers finding out about the fact that they're in this book. And one lady's dad is a general. And so we agreed that I would not print her surname. It would be like a French novel, you know, in Russia, you know, like Olga B. She comes across as Olga B. As you did, by the way, Stephen, in my first book, Stephen H. You're not mentioned, your surname is not mentioned in full, you know. So, I mean, there was a little bit of a problem, but quite honestly, no, it's nothing like as bad, I don't know, excuse me saying, but it's nothing like as bad here so far as it is in China, Stephen.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
next one is William Mateo.
Okay.
Hey, John, hi. I have a,
Hi.
hi, I've got a question for you. And one of the things that, I mean, I've been here since '92 working in 4 big companies.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed is that you can kind of roughly divide expats, and I'm saying expats because they were here working,
Yeah.
not because they were here interested in culture. But some were very successful managers of Russians,
yeah.
but many flamed out. And I'm just wondering if you have any patterns between the two. You know, I was fortunate to have done very well managing Russians and working with Russians and rapidly learning the culture. I didn't know anything about Russian culture when I got here. And cultivating some friendships where I could learn and people that were interested in teaching me.
Yeah.
But so fortunately, I've been pretty successful at it, but I know there were a lot of flameouts. And so did you see any patterns when talking to some of your people?
It's this sort of problem of being over the other side of the pond. I'm not quite sure what a flameout is actually, but
oh, a flameout is a failure.
Oh, failure.
In other words, some of the managers were simply failures at managing Russians.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, I haven't.
And by the way, let me say one thing. I don't mean managing Russians. I mean leading Russians.
I should be able to answer your question because I, you know, had the honourable position, perhaps dubiously honourable position of being editor-in-chief of a magazine called Moscow Expat Life. So I should know about all these things. But I actually, to be honest with you, I don't. I have to say I pass. Okay.
So, it's okay. That's all right. But so you didn't pick out like patterns.
I've never studied expats, and particularly even if I had, I haven't been able to even communicate with expats at all. Because I've been so busy.
I've had trouble with the same thing,
I've been
John.
living a life of almost a hermit, as people who know me know. So again, I'm afraid I have to pass on that one. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Most of my friends are Russians and not foreigners, so
Right.
thank you.
Okay.
John,
Thank you.
John, may I ask
Yes.
a question?
Please, Andrew. Yeah. Hi.
First of all, I want to second the comments of Stephen earlier about the importance of validating personal experience.
Yeah.
This is huge, as you know, as an anthropologist. This is essential to what we do. We try to strengthen the people that we work with, both individually and in their communities. But I wanted to touch a little bit on what the previous speaker raised, maybe turn it around a little bit. I'm interested in your sense of the late 80s and 90s and how many people thought of that, because we often do think of times of change as times of possibility. How many thought of that as possibilities, and how many thought of it with a certain fearfulness of what, you know, of losing stability, because stability gets to be this buzzword in Russia all the time. So what's your sense of that? And whether, can I just I want to phrase it, characterize it a little bit by asking you, first of all, to say, are the people that you interviewed still living in Moscow or in Russia? And if they are, have they been here since the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Well, let me answer the first bit of that question first. Yes, most of the Russians are living here and have been living here all the way through. Some of them, you know, went to study abroad for a couple of years, but not everybody. Some people never left the country.
Yeah.
The foreigners, not all of them are living here. As foreigners, as you know, people come and go for various reasons. Okay, now your major question, if you're asking me, then I can tell you what I think. Now, what I think may be different from what some of the people have expressed in this book. But are you asking me? Is that correct? My opinion?
I'm asking for your sense. I mean,
my sense,
not just your own, not your own personal experience, but based on your interactions with all of these people.
Okay. Well, I think that I mean, the comparison has been made to Perestroika and Glasnost, that it was like taking a pin and pricking a balloon and then trying to control it. And of course, once you prick that balloon, that's it. You know, it's out of control. It flies around, and people running around. Stop! You know, it's moving too fast, or it's moving in the wrong direction. And I think it was very much like that, really. There was a huge. I mean, I mentioned on my first, you know, I started talking this evening about being in the White House. I mean, the emotions, off the scale. You know, it was just an incredibly emotional time, but an emotional time. And if people believed in this new thing, whatever we call it, they believed in it totally and utterly. It was almost religious, you know, I think. And with all religions, they can be extreme. You know, they can be illogical, they can be fanatic even. So my sense is that there were heady kind of emotional times, and perhaps people didn't really understand what they were doing. I'm not just talking about the people on the street, but the politicians as well. They got advice from people who have been educated in different countries according to different cultural norms. And those people, they may be, you know, LSE economists or professors from Harvard, came to Russia to give advice to the politicians in power then. And perhaps they didn't really, those people didn't really understand the consequences of the advice they were giving. How could they? Because we're talking about a different culture and a different people and a different way of doing things. So in all, my sense was that it was a rush job. It was a rush job. Perhaps it was in the right direction. Perhaps it was the right direction, not denying that, but perhaps it was a rush job.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, John. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
John, hello. Can I ask you some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your presentation. I was really glad to hear it. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel different while you were writing this book, apart from that book, Trapped Between Two Cultures?
Yeah, I do, because the first one was about me.
Yeah, right. And
This
I
one-
mean, like, was it harder or maybe
This
easier?
one isn't about me, you know. Yeah. Well, just different, really. You know.
Okay, and another question. While reading this book, do we need some historical background to be aware of? Like, for example, I'm young and I'm not very good at history. And do I need to get myself a history book while reading yours to understand everything that was going on in yours?
Right. Well, it's not really supposed to be, you know, a history book. It's a book about people and what people felt, what people thought, what people experienced during those years. So it's not really sort of, I'm not positioning it as being an explanatory book about history. And you don't really have to understand Russian history to read that book. But being a Russian, you probably understand intuitively about 10 times more about what this country went through. During those years. Perhaps you picked up little bits of information from your parents or even your grandparents. I realize now that actually teaching you and other people in this digital room, you know, I take it for granted everybody knows what happened in the coup, you know, in 1991. But that was 29 years ago. 29 years ago now, you know. And if you go back to the 80s and the 70s, you're talking about 40, 50 years ago. Now that's already history, you know. We're talking about history, you know. So there's no reason that you should be familiar with these things, but it's very interesting that you aren't. You know, it's very interesting that you aren't familiar with those, with what happened. It just shows how much Russia has changed and how far we've come in a very, very, very short time from those days. I think you're waiting for an answer. Yes, I guess. I guess it's probably a good idea to familiarize yourself with the, you know, with the bare facts of what happened in Russia over those years. But you don't essentially need it to read this book.
Yeah, because I think it is influencing really on people's mood and atmosphere, and it brings you some sort of feeling of nostalgia while reading this book. So I just can't wait to see this book and to read it. I think like all people who were listening today for your presentation.
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you just tell me whether it's about, have you, while talking with people, did they tell you about their kind of soul searching, or it was mostly about surviving in those years?
Oh,
thank you for your lecture, for your talk.
Okay, Tatiana. Well, it was very different actually with each person, really. Some people only talked about survival. And some people went into deep philosophical themes, you know, and talked about, you know, the comparison of different aspects of Russian history and how that relates to what was happening over that period of time. You know, some people talked about theories such as, you know, the other, you know, the sort of looking at it academically. Some people talked about nostalgia, you know, those in those years, Soviet people perhaps had nostalgia for America, strangely enough. And people talked about all kinds of things, you know, and so there wasn't really one sort of, I can't really describe or you know, force all these different people into a particular box in the way that they responded to the questions.
Thank you very much.
Joan, may I ask a question?
Yes. Hello, Tatiana. Yeah.
Yes, first, nice to see you.
And nice to see you too.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful talk. And my question is about the style of interviewing. You know, in the beginning, you described your style of interviewing, but as the one who worked or who is still working at the Faculty of the Journalism of the Moscow State University. So, I mean, you. The question is about this difference in the Western style of interviewing and the Russian style of interviewing. Because, you know, judging by experts' opinion, they say that the Western style of interviewing is more aggressive than the Russian style of interviewing. This is the first part of the question. And the second one, I'm sure that you have seen some parts of interviews by our famous journalist, Vladimir Pozner.
Yeah.
So if you have seen any of his interviews, how do you evaluate his style?
Right. Well, aggressive or non-aggressive? Well, difficult to say, really. I mean, I've experienced being interviewed by Russian journalists, and I almost committed suicide after the interview. You know, I mean, not all Russian journalists are very peace-loving people. You know, and some of them are extremely, you know, balanced and ethical people. So I find it difficult as well to make any kind of draw with the baseline here. I mean, you could say that Western journalism has a more democratic tradition of, trying to be more receptive to the interviewee, but there are so many exceptions. And as you know, Western journalism is changing all the time. It's not something that's fixed, and as a media formats change, so does the methods of interviewing that journalists use. I mean, how many people in this room read newspapers? I don't think very many. You know, I was brought up on newspapers, as were you. I'm used to a balanced opinion. I'm used to 2 or 3 different points of view and a conclusion. Do I get that now? No, I don't. It's a new world we live in. So I don't really know whether Russian journalists are more aggressive. Perhaps their editors are. Perhaps what happens to the copy after the journalist has produced it is different. But to be honest with you, I can't really comment. I know it's a convenient thing to say that I don't know, but I really don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. There's another side to it. I mean, there are personalities, and you mentioned Vladimir Pozner, and he's an extremely charismatic person. And I think that he's allowed to do things that other journalists can't get away with, just because he's Vladimir Pozner, you know, and he worked as an anchor in the States for so many years, and so on, so on, so on. And therefore, he's somebody who people respect, and he's allowed to perhaps do things that other people can't do. But is he representative of Russian journalism? I don't know. I don't think so. So Vladimir Pozner to me is a sort of exception, is a kind of rare bird who flies in his own trajectory through the sky.
That's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, John, good evening. Thank you so much for the report. And I want to ask you, so is it now comfortable for you to living in Russia in comparison with the previous years?
Oh my God, now it's getting personal. I'd much rather stick the conversation to the book, please, if we could kind of focus on the book. But oh my goodness. Well, I mean, physically, I find I'm comfortable here. You know, I don't have to worry about money at the moment. Thank you to my wonderful employers, 2 of which are here tonight. So I'm saying the right things to please you. You know, I don't have a big problem with those things anymore. Do I have a problem on other levels? I think we all have problems on other levels, you know, and I think that because we're human beings, and it's not just, but hey, you know, like there's people here from Scotland, there's people here from Canada, there's people here from all over the world. Do they face issues? They face issues, you know. Do they face issues in the States right now, you know, with a president who isn't kind of like willing to just step down? I mean, lots. The elections, they face issues. Do people feel comfortable there? Not really. You know, our country is about to leave the European Union. Do I feel comfortable about that personally? No, I don't, you know. So everywhere there are problems, everywhere there are problems, everywhere there are issues. A lot of what goes on here and on here, and I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying that perhaps we have to look at it perhaps slightly different, that there are problems everywhere. And Russia is no exception. Definitely there are problems here. But there's a lot of good things as well, which nobody ever talks about, because it's not cool to do that. You know, it's really not cool to talk about the good side of what happens in Russia.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I see.
Maybe about the book rather than about me. You know.
Mr. Harrison, may I ask you a question?
Oh, Mr. Harrison.
Hello.
Okay, right. Hello.
And yeah, my name. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, just something is wrong with my internet connection. Well, my name is Ekaterina Bugrasheva, and I am a senior teacher at the Department of Theory and Practice of the English Language at Moscow State Regional University, Moscow Region State University. Well, my question is not directly related to your book, although your presentation was more than interesting. It was extraordinary. Thank you very much. My question, well, it's actually a question I've been interested in for a long time. Well, in Russia, we've got our propagandist channels, and you know their names. I think it's the first channel and the second channel. Well, and they present everything connected with the Western world, including the UK and the US, in a negative light, or they somehow diminish in this or that way the achievements of the Western world. The question is as follows. Do you have propagandist channels in the UK which diminish good things about Russia?
Right.
Or just, you know, present news about Russia always in a negative way?
Well, I think that the question really is, do cultures understand each other? I think that's really the question that you're asking. And I would say that in general, cultures don't really understand each other. I believe, in my experience, they tend not to. And it seems to be that politicians from time to time in all countries leverage this fact, that cultures don't always understand each other. And it's the easiest thing in the world to criticize another people in another culture, which is one reason, as I said, I tried to include foreigners in this book so that they could perhaps act as a bridge, because it's easier to understand foreigners and your people in another culture than it is to understand foreigners in a foreign culture. I don't really want to get into political discussions about Russia at the moment and about whether Russian television is propaganda or not. What I can say is that it is difficult for any mass media, anywhere in the world, to report accurately on all levels. I'm not just talking about the facts, I'm talking about in emotional terms, what goes on in other countries because of what we've been talking about this evening, because of the whole cultural baggage that all of us carry around with us, you know. So I'd rather leave it at that, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, I'm very hesitant here to not put my size 6 in my mouth, but what Ekaterina had touched upon, I find from a Scottish perspective and a UK perspective you're correct, Ekaterina. I cannot speak about your particular media because I don't know anything about it. But I do know that the Western media is, in my opinion, presenting your country and your adopted country to the rest of you, your host country, if you like, in a manner which I can only say is, in my opinion, biased, because nobody is all good and nobody is all bad. every human being on the planet has their own agenda, and it behoves different countries to promote their own agenda. This happens, it's the human condition. And I think that's what your book is doing, is looking more at the human condition. Is it Andrew Widgetts, the gentleman who said he was an anthropologist? Yeah, I thought so. As an anthropologist, then you'll know all about this. For one thing, nature abhors a vacuum. And for another, people's cultures, they are intrinsic to people and place.
Yeah.
But the human qualities, I believe, are transferable across boundaries and across language. And without sounding too airy-fairy, I think so many humans on the planet share the same ideals, the same needs, the same drives. I think you mentioned, John, at one point that certain things had almost attained a religious fervor at one point in Russia. And again, I think this is the human need for something to hold on to that makes your particular culture, the bit around you that you live in, not only cohesive, but safe and nurturing. And I get the feeling that your book and your open-ended approach to interview may well have shown this, maybe more than you even realize. And that's just judging from the précis that you've...
Well, I've tried to use open-ending interviewing techniques all the way through, but as I said, I'm not perfect, and I didn't approach this academically, and I've made mistakes. You know, you'll find that it's not ideally, you know, qualitative, but I've tried. I think that all I'm trying to do is communicate with people, and I think that probably all of us are what we're trying to do really is communicate with people. And the answer, the world has got so complicated, hasn't it? I mean, I guess it always was complicated, but it just seems with everything, it's so complicated these days. And sometimes I just think that we just need to talk to each other more, really, you know. And that's really what this is about. It's just giving people the chance to open their mouths and talk. Almost, it's almost, I'm not saying therapeutically, you know, like, you know, and tell me about your mother, you know,
Go on.
I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, you know, but I'm talking, just talk about what happened to you personally, you know, and I'm not studying these interviews. I'm not counting how many times they mention that word, you know.
No.
You know, it's just putting it down and letting other people, if they want to, if they're interested, gather a kind of whole array of different opinions and make their own conclusion, if they can, you know, make a conclusion. And so I you know, all I can say is I'm really inspired by you and by everybody who's come tonight and bothered to listen to me. And you know, because that's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to communicate, and I'm surprised that this is something unusual, but apparently it is.
John, may I make a comment in response to Katerina's query?
Yeah.
And also to the woman from the School of Journalism.
Yeah, you do it much better than I do, Andrew. Please.
Well, no. But you started by pointing out the reaction or the effect that exposure to journalism and to media have on general people, and you were referring to the influence of Western music and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's true generally, and in fact, you know, individual people and local communities are never out of touch with the mass media, so there's always this kind of interaction.
Yeah.
To respond to Katerina's question, I would say without question, the American media are biased against Russia. Now, what does that mean when I say that? It means, first of all, like almost every news network in the world, they tend to think of news as something that happens that is negative. So if there's something negative somewhere, that's going to be news. If there's something positive, that isn't news. Actually, except in the old Soviet Union, where there were positive reports of harvests and so forth. But negative things are news. And so that's, you will always hear only negatives. The difference is, I think, that when you only hear negatives about some place, that helps shape your opinion of it on an individual level. It's very hard to interact with that. And so when you use the word, the phrase, I think it was something like alternative universe or alternative reality in one of your first slides, I think that's true. It represents for many people another, what this exposure is different from what they get through the media. So, and then they're forced to find out whatever their soul responds to, and that's a big change. The other thing I wanted to say about media is that one of the differences, at least as I see it, is that although Western media focuses on the negative about Russia and generally only proposes negative stories about Russia, it does not tend to surround them with a lot of editorial commentary that's negative. So, and that's a difference that I see between Russian media and US media. But they're both generally negative, yeah. And it does shape people's opinions. So.
Well, thank you very much. That was an important addition, and thanks very much to Jan for her point of view.
But actually, in our media, we also have negative information about everything countries in the United States, and actually, and we have a lot of political discussions at night, in the afternoon.
Well,
and
actually talking about that, on our television, we've got plenty of that. And I was interested in the UK and USA television.
Katerina, we're struggling a little bit with your internet. We missed most of what you just said, but that's okay.
Right.
So maybe I should add that here at ELE, we're not speaking most of the time about something negative, but are trying to speak about something positive, something of the cultural value and of heritage, of course, and history. And we're trying to be really objective about history, just like John mentioned in his book. Yes, so we're trying to not to be too subjective, but listen to different points of view and maybe just to look for some similarities, not differences.
I don't want to hog this, but Oksana and John, can I ask you, John, did you interview people from outlying country places or only from cities?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Unfortunately, most of the people were from cities, but a couple of them were from small cities. That's one good thing. One of them from Kursk, I think. That's not sure how you say it in Russian. And another was from St. Petersburg. Of course, that's not considered to be a small city, but it's not Moscow, at least. It's not Moscow. And that's important. So I suppose about 75–80% of the people, the Russians, are from Moscow, and the others from outside of Moscow.
Excuse me, I have a question. the historical period you chose for your book from 1970 to 2000, 2000, yes, it's absolutely unique. It was the time of tectonic shifts, enormous changes. The present time, the world we live in right now, it's absolutely different. It changed almost beyond recognition, especially last year. And I think the key word to characterize our time is uncertainty. We live in a great uncertainty. We don't know what will happen in a week, in a day. And my question is, are there any lessons we can learn from that historical period you studied in your book, which can be applied to our present crazy time? And I mean practical lessons.
Right. Okay.
Not for politicians, but for common people like me.
Okay. Well,
what mistakes can we avoid?
Firstly, you're not a common person, Konstantin. You're a regular member of ELE, so you're already an exception. Okay. Secondly, this is an ongoing process, isn't it? I mean, like, you might think that Russia is now stable, and maybe it is comparatively stable. But I keep on sort of getting this sort of feeling that it's not that stable. This process is continuing. We're still changing, we're still evolving. And to say, I think, to answer your question, is this something we can learn from the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? Well, yes, if we were stable and we'd stop changing and we could look back and say, well, if I tried that and that worked, I didn't try that, that would be one thing. But the country is still evolving, isn't it? It's still developing. Who knows what's going to be like? You said yourself, who knows what's going to be like in a couple of years' time, you know? So I find it quite difficult to think of examples. But of course, adaptation, you know, people had to adapt. People had to adapt to survive. And some of them, you know, really had to go through a lot to do that. In this book, there's a lot of, well, some people are telling some pretty horrific stories about what they had to do to survive. And I guess that's perhaps something that we foreigners really underestimate about Russians, that you are able to adapt. You have to. You don't have any choice, because the situations happen in life. And I think that possibly that quality of adaptation is something that you seem to carry with you. And perhaps the only thing I can say is that perhaps not to lose that quality, you know, to keep it with you, you know, and to not to forget that we're still evolving and we're still changing. Oh, I sound so teacher-like, sound like I'm teaching something important, you know. But I mean, I'm just saying that that's probably the only thing really that I can say, because the externals have changed so much. You know, the external change, the structures of society has changed so much. You know, we don't, I don't want to talk about, no, I'll stop there. Okay.
Could I?
Does that answer your question? Professor Oshepkina.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for an exceptionally enjoyable talk and discussion after that. And I have two very pragmatic questions.
Oh, pragmatic.
First one, where and when can we buy the book?
Oh, right, okay.
And the second question, could you please make a similar presentation for the students in the next semester in the course of cross-cultural communication, if you do not mind?
Okay, well, first question, it's in the design stage now, the book. So, you know, these things take a long time, but it will be available on Amazon from, I believe, December the 20th. Not that that's going to help many people in this digital room, because I don't know, there may be some problems in getting post from Amazon. I don't know whether it works or not. I seem to be able to receive books from Amazon here in Russia, but not everybody does. So it's going to be published here in Moscow, but that also takes time. And I won't have hard copies available in Moscow until mid-February. Mid-February, in which case I'll be very happy to bring them to the university if I'm allowed to, because of my age, you know. I'll have to meet at 2 meter distance, and I'll kind of, you know, put them on disc or something. You can pick them up in a predestined time. So mid-February. And as far as talking about this to your students, very happy to, of course. I'd be extremely honored to do that. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if that can be arranged after I actually have some hard copies of the book available, so that it's not just an academic conversation, and that it is actually something practical, that here, this is what I'm talking about. I'd appreciate that. But yes, well, thank you for making me feel important.
If I may ask a question, John?
Oh, yes, Marina.
Yes, hi. Well, I'm so glad to see you. And thank you so much. I was so much impressed by your first book, Trapped Between Cultures. I absolutely loved it. And I was so much impressed with its sincerity and your, you know, your passion for knowledge and knowledge of human nature. And I think you are very much in trying to build bridges between cultures. So you said this second book is not about yourself, but definitely the writer is always there behind, you know, the speakers. And in your interview, first of all, the question is about the book design. You have your drawings and pictures there, right? Or
yeah, you're right. I guess my voice in this particular production is my drawings and paintings. That's my voice in this.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so you're right.
Talking about interviews. Yes, please.
Firstly, thank you very much for your compliments. There are lots of problems with that first book, and I'm not happy with the name, but it's too late now. But yeah, of course I'm there. You cannot not be there. But I've tried to reduce my presence to the absolute minimum.
Okay. But when you talk to different people, did you have different questions, or did you have a kind of standard list to proceed from in the beginning?
I know it sounds silly, but I really didn't know what to ask people. Okay, I mean,
no,
I really didn't, and actually, I didn't want to know what to ask people, because
really,
as I tried to explain in the beginning of this little presentation, that if I had known what I wanted to ask them, it would be like saying, well, why am I asking you anyway? Because I already know the answer.
No, but a kind of plan.
So I tried not to, I didn't have lists of questions. And
okay.
It was a spontaneous flow of information. So okay. Of course I started off with a question like, where did you spend your childhood or something like that? You know, just to
yes, this is what I'm interested in.
Yeah. But after that, it was the person answered the question, and then I asked a question which would hopefully encourage that person to continue that line of thought.
The narrative.
But obviously the person knew that I was interested in talking to him or her, because we were talking about what it was like living in Russia in the 1970 to 2000, that period of time. So it was roughly under that umbrella, you know, not particularly about, you know, what did you find in the shops today, you know. It was specific in a certain way, but beyond that, it was completely open-ended. and that was it was a lot of fun, actually. You know, I really enjoy that kind of interviewing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Any more questions?
Yes, please. Am I well heard? Do you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, yep.
Okay. Thank you, John, for your lecture. I'm very happy that you made another book that I'm going to read. It's a pleasure, really. It was a pleasure to read your previous book, and I know that it will be a pleasure to read this one.
Well,
I've got
no,
a question.
No, hang on. You're too complimentary, okay? It might be awful,
Okay.
right?
I'm like that. You should make a peace with it. I'm like that. I will not change. So just my question is, what language did you interview people? Just were they mostly Russians, or just part of them were English?
Right.
As I understand, they were mostly Russians, right?
No.
No.
11 Russians and 11 foreigners. Okay, so all of the foreigners spoke English, apart from one who was French. That was the problem, because I don't speak French. So he spoke in Russian. He spoke in sort of French and a bit of English, and it was really difficult to transcribe that interview. But I transcribed it; it was okay. But all the other interviewees, foreigners, spoke in English, so that was the foreigners. The Russians spoke in Russian, and then I translated that into English.
But they were mostly Russians or foreigners?
As I said, 11 foreigners and 11 Russians.
Equally. Why did you choose English then? You know that who is the target audience of this book, Russians or English-speaking people? As you know, just there are only few Russian-speaking people that know English, and they will not be able to read it.
That's a very good point. And if it's a success, then there will be enough money for me to afford to employ a translator. Perhaps of the foreigners and the Russians, I have all the recordings, so an editor could go through the transcriptions, the recordings rather, and produce a Russian version. But all this costs money, and it's not, you know, it's not as simple as it may seem. And so I shall see how it goes.
How you define success for your book? How will you understand that the book was a success?
Well, okay, I'm being pragmatic. How many copies it sells, you know, how much money comes in.
And can you just just add something? Did you know that people you interviewed, or it was like random choice, or there was
okay, I think I said, actually, I mentioned this in the
introduction.
I didn't speak
okay,
very
sorry.
clearly. No, it's okay. Perhaps I didn't speak very clearly. It's quite possible. I knew roughly a third of them.
Okay.
And the others, I didn't know them at all. Never even seen them. You know, I just did not know them. So yeah.
But did you adapt the language to the international audience, or it was like purely authentic?
Well, I had some problems with that, and the problems were, I kind of set myself a kind of law, if you like, a rule, that if the text is non-comprehensible to me, then I'm going to have to clarify things. And sometimes I phone people up and ask them, what did they mean by that? Because sometimes when you're speaking and speaking very quickly, perhaps you know, lose track of it. But I tried to not change things. I mean, nothing has been changed. What you read is what they said, basically. And so have to be very careful about that. But as I'm the guy who put it together, okay, it's in my English, I'm afraid. But when their syntax is very Russian, and they use things like очень, you know, and in English, when you say very, very, sometimes it's not considered to be good English. I left it in anyway, okay? So it's very, very, even if it might not be good English. So I try to kind of bring across all those, as much sort of Russian syntax as I could into English, but as you realize, it's very difficult to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? And the silence is the
I think
answer.
I'd just like to finally say back to Stephen Hallett, you know, that the validation of the interviews, the validation of what people say, is something that I was thinking about all the time. You know, that it's incredibly important. So that was an ongoing issue, and the only difference I believe is a difference in extremes. But the problem remains the same. That I experienced the same problem you were talking about, and that was something that I just like to add and say that before we finish.
Thank you, John. I mean, I really concur with that, and I think what you've done, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book when it's available. Being partially sighted, I hope that there'll also be an audio version of it. I'd recommend that you read it yourself and that you do it audible. I would love that.
Right,
but,
I hadn't thought of that. It's a really good idea. Thank you very much. Yeah,
it's quite possible actually, and more people are doing that now. Through there are various outfits that can help you with that. But just to say, yes, I mean, telling of stories, you know, it's such a deep human experience, you know, sharing stories and relating your own personal testimony, your own personal stories goes right to the heart of what it is to be human. And you're talking a lot about cultural differences and the problems of cultural understanding and cultural exchange. And we've lived between different societies, you and me, and all of us, many of us here. And I think what we've tried to find is a very sort of fundamental human element which drives us forward as human beings. And whatever sort of cultural problems or cultural differences there might be, which often, you know, dominate people's perceptions and thinking, we can actually bury down, we can dig down into the sort of the human substructure of people's lives. And I think when we find those elements, you know, whether we're talking about history, historical processes, things that people have been through, even in very, very different contexts, we can find some genuine connection. And I think it's through storytelling. I mean, when we read, for example, Tolstoy or Chekhov or some of the great Russian writers, we find that human connection because they are such great storytellers. And they're talking about real people. You know, they're not, they may be describing fictional characters, but actually they're talking about real human emotions. And we can sympathize and empathize with those from our own cultural perspective. So if all I would say is, if you've managed to do a little of that, to touch on that, then this will be a brilliant and significant work. And thank you very much look forward to reading it.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. And I think we need to talk, okay, separately, because a lot to talk about here. I think we could, yeah, okay. But great to be in touch again. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming. So I think we've kind of reached a sort of natural end.
John, can I ask you one last question, please?
Maybe I can answer because I'm really bad at answering.
I hope so. Very simply, what motivated you to write this?
Okay.
Where did the ideas spring from?
Well, honestly, as I said, I'm getting on, you know, and I've lived through a hell of a lot here. Excuse my my French. I didn't mean to say French. I mean, excuse my bad language. Sorry. And I just wanted to record it somehow, you know. As I said, this book would be a success if only one person reads it, and that's my daughter. I want to pass this knowledge on, these experiences on to somebody. And it's as simple as that, really. Feeling and some of these things that I've been through are so extreme, you know, I can't just forget about them, just walk on and never happen. Walk on into old age and just forget about it. So I felt a kind of obligation to myself to do this. And that's the first reason. The second reason is to do the good work that we were talking about now earlier on this evening. Okay, and I feel that we have to sort of encourage communication between people, between nations, to just get people talking again, you know, beyond the politics. And that's what this book's all about, really. You know, it's about ordinary people. Well, you know, ordinary in quotes. What's an ordinary person? I don't know what an ordinary person is. But people just talking with each other about ordinary things, okay? I mean, that's something that we just don't do very much between Russia and Britain or America, you know, because of all the problems that we have. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a rebel, you know. That's what I get a kick out of doing. So those are basically the reasons.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, John. So as soon as I heard that John was writing a book, so I just keep on writing to him, just when it's going to be ready, because I want you to repeat the success of your previous.
Time ago, wasn't it? It was about 2.5 years ago we started this conversation.
Yes. So and every now and then, it's just like I drop the line, like, so how is the book? So, and I'm really glad to know that it's finally on the final stage. So we'll be happy to announce it as soon as it's published in Russia here, probably, and at Amazon as well, if some of our readers are interested in it.
That's great.
So,
I really appreciate that, Oksana. That's a really tremendous help. Thank you very much.
yes, I remember how many copies you sold the previous time in the library.
it was
That's
wonderful.
a shame.
It was wonderful. I thought I'd do the same again, but
Unfortunately, yes. I hoped that that would happen too, but COVID, you know, unfortunately. So, and now I should say that
So can I
probably.
just say thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you coming, and it was wonderful to talk to you and to see some people I haven't seen sort of for decades almost. So it's really, really wonderful. So just let me say thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
John.
So, and hopefully you'll write another one, yet another one, the third one.
No.
Well, just think about it, you know, because we'll book a date for you at Ailey.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can, Jay. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Well done. I'm so impressed. Just amazing.
Well, don't be.
I want to copy lots of copies of the book as soon as possible.
All right. Okay. I'll get one sent to you.
Well, we both will, actually. No, don't worry about that. I'll buy it.
Okay, but yeah, I want you to read it, and I've actually dedicated this book to my family. It says it on the third page, dedicated to my family. So you are top of the list.
Well, bless you. Well done.
Yeah.
Quite something. Very impressive.
Thank you, Joe. Wonderful to see you.
No,
And I saw a little bit of
wonderful to
Malcolm there.
hear.
Just,
Thank you. Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so what we normally do at the end of our offline lectures, we applaud to the speaker for a wonderful lecture. So let's do that right now. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much.
You see, you need to think of another book, you know.
No. It's not like that. You know, it's a long process. I tell you, it's a long process. So
But anyway, I think you can initiate any discussion next time. You can just come up with some ideas, not about book, but just in general. Yeah.
Well, looking forward to the next
Yeah.
our meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I found it's difficult to say goodbye in those Zoom conferences because that's the end of communication. After our lectures, we used to go somewhere. We had a chance to talk over a drink or something, but in those Zoom conference, it's difficult to say goodbye.
It is difficult to say goodbye. I think we were going to say that this is actually going to be the last lecture this year.
Oh, okay.
We're due to have one with Daniel Medvedev, who is going to talk about Frank Sinatra. Well, actually, he is going to talk about Frank Sinatra, but not with us, because he's actually hoping to have a band so that he can sing Frank Sinatra. But he will be doing that separately because the basis will be slightly different, and he'll be inviting people to participate, which will be great. But it's a payment. There'll be a very small payment of a couple of hundred rubles. So, and that's not what ELE does. However, we're very pleased to partner with him and to tell people that that is going to happen. But next year we will have some more great lectures, and they'll be coming up, and we'll be announcing those very soon. And we do have one ready for I think it's the 15th of January, something like that. I've made no comment on John. I've really enjoyed John's lecture. He was saying, oh, perhaps I don't know about the name, blah, blah, blah. I don't know whether building bridges or rebuilding bridges, one of something like that. But certainly John has, I think, been like a sort of a piece of iron across banks. And we just try and hope that he keeps taut, because he's been an amazing person when it comes to keeping us all informed and keeping us all understanding, which is really.
I'd like also to thank all the people that I interviewed, and some of them are here, or maybe they've already gone. I'm sorry, I forgot earlier on. It's very important. And I'd also like to thank somebody called Hugh Gattenby. I don't know if he's here or not, but he also helped me in the final stages of the project when I appreciated his poignant, sarcastic remarks and his acidic humor, which is extremely important sometimes when you need inspiration. If he's here, he'll understand what I mean, but I think he's gone.
Yeah, he was here. I think he's left.
Yeah. And here's Frank Sinatra.
Okay.
There we go. Wonderful.
We'll finish, I guess. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody, and have a great evening. Dana, a final word.
Maybe just congratulations on forthcoming festive season. Yes. As it's our last lecture this year, so have a very, very Merry Christmas and very, very Happy New Year. And see you next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to switch off now.
Bye.
Bye, family. Bye, Jane.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Well done. Well done.
Hi, Lucy. Yeah, Stephen, if you're here. Okay.